The forest lay silent, blanketed in a thick layer of winter snow. Two figures, bundled in heavy coats, crouched low behind a copse of frost-covered trees. Their breath billowed out in clouds of vapor in the chill air, their Baker rifles held steady, eyes fixed on their target. Through the tangled branches, a young buck emerged, its antlers glistening with frost. It was a fine specimen, though still immature, bearing only 8 points on its crown. The hunters exchanged a silent glance, understanding the weight of their decision. The village depended on them for sustenance, and every morsel of food was precious in the harsh winter months. With a heavy heart, they took aim, their fingers steady on the triggers. The report of their rifles shattered the silence, echoing through the snowy expanse. The buck stumbled, its dark eyes wide with fear as it collapsed onto the crimson-stained snow. The hunters approached cautiously, their hearts heavy with the weight of their deed. As they gazed upon the fallen creature, a pang of remorse washed over them. They had taken a life, not out of sport, but out of necessity. Yet, in the distance, the smoke rising from the chimneys of their village reminded them of the mouths to feed, the families relying on their skill as hunters. With a silent prayer for the spirit of the fallen buck, they hoisted their prize onto their shoulders and began the long journey home, their footsteps muffled by the blanket of snow beneath their feet. As the hunters trudged through the snow-covered landscape, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. The journey back to the settlement of Benjamin seemed shorter than usual, perhaps because they were weighed down not only by the deer, but also by the burden of their actions. The flickering glow of lamplight greeted them as they approached the heart of the settlement. It was a modest collection of structures, little more than 2 log buildings and a scattering of tents, nestled amidst the rugged terrain of the deep west. A lone sign, weather-worn and faded, hung from a sturdy oak tree, bearing the simple inscription, "Welcome to the settlement of Benjamin." Despite its humble appearance, Benjamin was home to a tight-knit community of pioneers and settlers, bound together by the harsh realities of frontier life. In these untamed lands, survival depended on cooperation and resilience, virtues the villagers possessed in abundance. As they entered the settlement, the hunters were met with nods of recognition and weary smiles from their fellow settlers. The cook, a sturdy woman with hands calloused from years of toil, welcomed them with a grateful nod as they deposited the deer at her feet. "Thank you, boys," she said, her voice tinged with fatigue. "This will feed us well for a few days." The hunters nodded in acknowledgement, their exhaustion tempered by a sense of duty fulfilled. They knew that in a place like Benjamin, every contribution mattered, no matter how small. With the deer safely in the hands of the cook, the hunters bid their fellow settlers good night and made their way to their own humble abode, a small cabin nestled on the outskirts of the settlement. As they settled in for the night, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, they couldn't shake the feeling that despite the challenges they faced, they were exactly where they were meant to be. In the vast expanse of the deep west, amidst the harsh beauty of the wilderness, they had found a home. The hunters retired to their individual beds, weary from their long day's journey and the weight of their responsibilities. Despite the warmth of the blankets, sleep eluded them, their minds restless with worry. Outside, the night pressed in, the darkness swallowing the settlement of Benjamin whole. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of snow on the horizon. Winter was unforgiving in these lands, its icy grip tightening with each passing day. In their cabin, the hunters tossed and turned, their thoughts consumed by the looming specter of hunger. The single deer they had brought back would only sustain the village for so long, and with the forest yielding little in the way of game, their prospects seemed bleak. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, a glimmer of determination flickered in their hearts. They were hunters, survivors of the frontier, and they refused to yield to despair. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to provide for their community. With this resolve in mind, the hunters finally succumbed to sleep, their dreams haunted by visions of the vast, untamed wilderness that lay beyond the boundaries of Benjamin. In the depths of the night, as the stars glittered overhead and the forest whispered its secrets, they rested, knowing that when morning came, they would rise once more to face the trials of the frontier. As the first light of dawn cast a faint glow over the snow-covered landscape, the hunters stirred from their slumber, their breath forming misty clouds in the crisp morning air. With practiced efficiency, they donned their warmest fur-skin clothes, wrapping themselves in layers of protection against the biting cold. Their rifles and pistols gleamed in the faint sunlight as they checked their weapons, ensuring they were primed and ready for the hunt ahead. Alongside their trusty firearms, they carried pouches of musket-shot ammo, the weight of their ammunition a reassuring presence at their sides. With determined steps, they set out from the village, leaving behind the safety of Benjamin, and venturing into the vast expanse of the wilderness. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the only sound in the stillness of the early morning. Their breath hung in the air like wisps of smoke as they trudged through the snow, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The forest stretched out before them, silent and watchful, its secrets hidden beneath the blanket of white. For hours they pressed on, their senses sharpened by the anticipation of the hunt. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twigs beneath their feet, sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through their veins. They moved with the silent grace of predators, their movements fluid and deliberate as they stalked their elusive prey. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow, the hunters pressed on, undeterred by the unforgiving terrain. For in the heart of the wilderness, amidst the beauty and the danger, they knew that survival depended on their skill as hunters, their determination to provide for their community, and their unyielding resolve to conquer the challenges of the frontier. The hunters pressed on through the snow-laden landscape, their brows furrowed in confusion as they scanned the ground for any signs of animal tracks. Yet to their mounting dismay, they found nothing but unbroken expanses of pristine white. It was as if the forest itself had been swallowed by an eerie silence, devoid of the usual signs of life that echoed through its depths. No tracks marred the snow, no rustle of underbrush betrayed the presence of hidden creatures. With each step, their unease grew, a gnawing sense of dread settling in the pit of their stomachs. In a land where the cycle of life and death was as constant as the changing seasons, the absence of wildlife was an ominous portent, a sign that something was amiss in the heart of the wilderness. They exchanged worried glances, their breath forming frosty puffs in the frigid air. The forest seemed to close in around them, its towering trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. Yet, despite the palpable tension that hung in the air, the hunters pressed on, their determination unwavering in the face of uncertainty. For they knew that in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, even the slightest of weakness could spell doom. With each passing moment, the silence of the forest weighed heavily upon them, a reminder of the vast, untamed expanse that surrounded them. And as they trudged onward through the snow, their senses alert for any sign of movement, they knew that the true hunt had only just begun. As they trudged on through the silent expanse of the snow-covered forest, the weight of the eerie stillness pressing down upon them like a heavy cloak, one of the hunters, Anthony, turned to his companion, Tomas, and spoke in a low voice. "Do you feel all right, Tomas?" Anthony asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Tomas glanced at him, his expression troubled. "No, Anthony, I don't. It feels as though the very air is heavy with dread." Anthony frowned, a shiver running down his spine at the unsettling words of his friend. In the vast wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner, any sense of foreboding was not to be taken lightly. But the hunters were men of the frontier, hardened by years of survival in the harsh wilderness. They were not ones to be swayed by fear or superstition, their focus resolute on the task at hand, providing for their village, no matter the cost. Pushing aside their unease, they continued onward, their eyes scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The urgency of their mission spurred them forward, driving them deeper into the heart of the wilderness in search of game. With each step, The sense of unease that had settled over them seemed to grow, a palpable presence that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Yet, despite the ominous feeling that surrounded them, they remained steadfast in their determination, their minds fixed on the singular goal of securing meat for their village. For in the unforgiving frontier, where every day brought new challenges and dangers, there was no room for hesitation or doubt. And so, with grim resolve, they pressed on, their footsteps echoing through the silent woods as they ventured further into the unknown. Relief washed over the hunters as they finally stumbled upon tracks in the fresh snow, a sign of life amidst the desolate silence of the wilderness. With renewed determination, they crouched down to examine the tracks, their eyes scanning the impressions left behind. "It's a large deer," Anthony remarked, tracing the outline of the hoof prints with his gloved fingers. "A buck, by the looks of it. This could be exactly what we need." Tomas nodded in agreement, his gaze following the trail as it wound its way deeper into the forest. "Let's follow it," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "With any luck, it'll lead us straight to our quarry." With rifles at the ready, the hunters set off once more, their boots crunching in the snow as they trailed after the elusive deer. The forest seemed to come alive around them, the stillness broken by the occasional caw of a crow or the rustle of branches in the breeze. As they followed the tracks deeper into the heart of the wilderness, the tension that had gripped them since their departure from Benjamin began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. For in the hunt, there was a thrill unlike any other, a primal instinct that stirred within them as they closed in on their prey. With each passing moment, the tracks grew clearer, the trail leading them ever closer to their elusive quarry. And as they pressed on through the snow-covered undergrowth, their hearts pounding with excitement, they knew that they were on the verge of success. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where every hunt was a battle for survival, victory belonged to those with the skill, the patience, and the determination to seize it. As the hunters followed the tracks deeper into the forest, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Hours seemed to pass in the blink of an eye as they pressed on, their anticipation growing with each step. Finally, as the light began to fade, they stumbled upon their bounty. But to their surprise and astonishment, it was not a deer that stood before them, but a massive elk, its towering antlers reaching towards the darkening sky. The hunters exchanged incredulous glances, their initial excitement giving way to a sense of awe at the sheer size of their quarry. For in their minds, they had been tracking a deer, not expecting to find such a majestic creature in the depths of the wilderness. Yet, as they gazed upon the towering form of the elk, a plan began to form in their minds. The forest around them was dense with trees and foliage, obstructing their view and making it difficult to get a clear shot. "We'll have to wait until it's in a clearing," Anthony said, his voice low with determination. "There are too many obstacles in the way." Tomas nodded in agreement, his eyes never leaving the elk as it moved gracefully through the undergrowth. "We'll bide our time," he said, his fingers tightening around the stock of his rifle. "When the moment is right, we'll strike." And so the hunters settled in to wait, their eyes fixed on the magnificent creature before them, knowing that patience and precision would be the keys to their success. For in the vast expanse of the wilderness where danger lurked around every corner, only the strongest and most determined would emerge victorious. With the last rays of sunlight fading from the sky, the hunters silently stalked through the dense undergrowth, their movements fluid and precise. They crept to the edge of the forest, their hearts pounding with anticipation as they waited for the elk to step into the clearing beyond. And then, as if sensing the perfect moment, the elk emerged from the final tree of the wood line, its massive form outlined against the fading light. With practiced ease, both men raised their rifles, their fingers tightening on the triggers as they took aim. The forest echoed with the thunderous report of their guns as they fired in unison, the sound reverberating through the silent wilderness. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder as the bullets found their mark, striking the massive elk with deadly accuracy. With a mighty bellow, the elk staggered, its powerful legs buckling beneath it as it collapsed onto the snow-covered ground. The hunters rushed forward, their hearts racing with adrenaline as they approached their fallen quarry. They stood over the magnificent creature, their breath coming in ragged gasps as they gazed upon the bounty of their hunt. Despite the enormity of their prize, there was no sense of triumph in their hearts, only a deep reverence for the life they had taken and the sustenance it would provide for their village. Together, they knelt beside the fallen elk, offering silent thanks for its sacrifice as they prepared to butcher the massive beast and carry its meat back to Benjamin. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, every hunt was a test of skill and determination. A reminder of the harsh realities of survival in a land where only the strongest and most resilient could hope to thrive. With their prize securely tied and packed, the hunters hoisted the heavy load onto their shoulders, the weight of the elk a tangible reminder of their success and the responsibility it carried. As they set off through the darkening forest, the fading light of day gave way to the inky blackness of night, enveloping them in a world of shadows and uncertainty. With each step, they strained their eyes against the darkness, searching for any familiar landmarks that would lead them back to Benjamin. But the dense canopy of trees overhead obscured the stars, leaving them disoriented and unsure of their path. Realizing they needed light to guide their way, the hunters paused to retrieve their lanterns from their packs. With a flick of the flint, the lanterns sprang to life, casting a warm glow that illuminated the surrounding trees and snow-covered ground. With their lanterns held aloft, the hunters pressed on, their breath forming clouds of vapor in the frigid air. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows dancing eerily in the flickering light of their lanterns. Despite the darkness and the uncertainty of their surroundings, the hunters remained determined to find their way back to Benjamin. With each passing moment, they pushed forward, their resolve unshaken by the challenges that lay ahead. As they trudged through the snow, the glow of the lanterns casting long shadows behind them, they clung to the hope that they would soon emerge from the depths of the forest and find themselves once more in familiar territory. For in the wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner, the light of hope was the only beacon that could guide them home. As the hunters continued to navigate through the darkness of the forest, their sense of unease grew with each passing moment. The realization that their tracks had vanished, swallowed by the blanket of snow, filled them with a creeping sense of dread. But despite the rising panic threatening to overtake them, the hunters remained calm and focused, their determination unwavering in the face of adversity. With steady hands, they began to make notches in the trees with their knives, marking their path through the wilderness and ensuring they wouldn't lose their way further. With each notch, they pressed on, the weight of the elk slowing their progress but not dampening their spirits. They moved slowly and deliberately, the cumbersome burden of their bounty a constant reminder of the importance of their mission. "Man, this elk is heavy," Anthony grunted, his muscles straining under the weight of the massive creature. Tomas nodded in agreement, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggled to keep pace. "But we can't afford to stop," he replied, his voice determined. "We have to keep moving, no matter how difficult it may be." And so, with the elk in tow and the notched trees as their guide, the hunters pressed on through the darkness, their resolve unshaken by the challenges that lay ahead. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner, the only way forward was to keep moving, one step at a time, until they found their way back to safety. With the weight of the elk slowing their progress, the hunters pressed on through the darkness, their lanterns casting a dim glow on the snow-covered ground as they moved slowly but steadily forward. Every step was a struggle, the cumbersome burden of their bounty testing their endurance with each passing moment. Suddenly, amidst the stillness of the night, a low growl pierced the air, causing the hunters to freeze in their tracks. They exchanged wary glances, their senses on high alert as they strained to identify the source of the sound. "It's wolves," Anthony whispered, his voice tense with apprehension. "They must smell the elk." Tomas nodded grimly, his grip tightening on the stock of his rifle as he scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. The growls grew louder, echoing through the forest like a warning of impending danger. With practiced ease, the hunters raised their rifles high, their fingers poised on the triggers as they prepared to defend themselves and their precious cargo. The tension in the air was palpable, the anticipation of the impending confrontation hanging heavy around them. And then, as if on cue, the growls escalated into snarls, the sound of snapping jaws reverberating through the night. The hunters held their breath, their eyes fixed on the shadows that lurked beyond the reach of their lanterns, waiting for the wolves to make their move. But still, they waited, their nerves stretched taut as bowstrings, as the minutes ticked by in agonizing silence. In the darkness of the forest, with the threat of danger looming ever closer, the hunters stood their ground, ready to face whatever challenges the wilderness might throw their way. As the pair of wolves launched themselves forward, their eyes gleaming in the darkness, the hunters remained steadfast, their aim steady, as they waited for the perfect moment to strike. With a thunderous roar, they unleashed a hail of rifle fire, the sharp cracks of their weapons echoing through the night as the wolves were brought down in a flurry of fur and blood. The hunters stood for a moment, panting heavily as the adrenaline of the encounter coursed through their veins. They exchanged a grim nod, acknowledging the danger they had just faced and the necessity of their actions. "It's a shame we didn't bring a cargo sled," Anthony remarked, casting a regretful glance at the fallen wolves. "Those wolves would have made good meat." Tomas nodded in agreement, his gaze sweeping over the lifeless bodies of the creatures. "Yes, but now we have the scent of both the elk and these wolves on us," he replied, his voice tense with apprehension. "Their pack won't be happy about this. We need to get scarce." With that, the hunters wasted no time in gathering their belongings and hoisting the carcass of the elk once more onto their shoulders. With the threat of the wolf pack looming in the darkness, they knew they couldn't afford to linger any longer than necessary. With wary eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, they set off through the forest once more, their footsteps quickening as they hastened to put distance between themselves and the scene of the confrontation. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner, survival depended on swift action and a keen awareness of the dangers that lay in wait. The hunters paused as they stumbled upon a set of tracks in the snow, two sets of human footprints imprinted in the otherwise undisturbed landscape. Their hearts quickened with a mixture of relief and curiosity as they recognized the familiar pattern of their own boots. "These look like our prints," Anthony remarked, bending down to examine the tracks more closely. "But I don't remember us passing through here before." Tomas nodded in agreement, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Neither do I," he replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But there's no mistaking it. These are definitely our tracks." With a shared sense of determination, the hunters decided to follow the prints, trusting in their own instincts to lead them back to safety. They moved forward, their eyes scanning the snow-covered ground for any sign of their passage. As they walked, the footprints grew clearer, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest. With each step, the sense of familiarity grew, a comforting reminder that they were on the right path. Yet as they pressed on, the hunters couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. Something about the situation felt off, as if they were being led astray by forces beyond their control. But despite their misgivings, the hunters pushed forward, their determination unwavering, as they followed the tracks through the darkness of the forest. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where every step could mean the difference between life and death, they knew that they had to trust in themselves and in each other if they were to find their way back home. The hunters came to a sudden halt, their brows furrowed in confusion as they stared at the tracks before them. What had started as two distinct sets of footprints now seemed to merge together, forming a single trail that stretched out before them. Anthony's voice broke the uneasy silence that hung in the air. "This doesn't make sense," he said, his tone tinged with unease. "How could our tracks merge into one set?" Tomas shook his head. His eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the bizarre phenomenon. "I don't know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But something doesn't feel right about this." The hunters exchanged wary glances, the heavy scent of the elk hanging in the air like a dark cloud over their heads. The weight of their burden seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, the smell of blood and flesh mingling with the musty odor of the forest. Disturbed by the strange convergence of the footprints and the oppressive weight of the elk slung over their backs, the hunters hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows dancing eerily in the dim light of their lanterns. But despite their growing sense of unease, the hunters knew they couldn't afford to linger any longer. With a shared sense of determination, they pushed forward, their senses on high alert, as they continued to follow the mysterious trail that lay before them. For in the wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner, they knew that they had to stay vigilant if they were to find their way back home. And so, with the weight of the elk pressing heavily upon their shoulders, and the unsettling mystery of the merging footprints at their heels, the hunters pressed on, their resolve unshaken by the challenges that lay ahead. As the hunters pressed on through the snow-covered wilderness, the first gentle flakes of snow began to drift down from the darkened sky, swirling and dancing in the air before settling softly on the ground. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with each passing moment as the storm gathered strength overhead. Anthony glanced up at the darkening sky, his brow furrowed in concern as he watched the snowflakes grow larger and more numerous. "Looks like we're in for a storm tonight," he remarked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. Tomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the disappearing footprints before them. "We need to keep moving," he said, his tone urgent. "We can't afford to get caught out in the open when the storm hits." With a shared sense of urgency, the hunters quickened their pace, their boots crunching in the snow as they followed the faint trail that lay before them. But as they trudged onward, their hearts sank as they realized that the last set of footprints had slowly begun to disappear, swallowed by the relentless onslaught of the falling snow. A sense of unease settled over them. The disappearance of the tracks a troubling sign of the dangers that lay ahead. They knew that if they were to have any hope of finding their way back home, they would need to act quickly before the storm engulfed them completely. With determination fueling their steps, the hunters forged ahead, their lanterns casting feeble beams of light in the swirling darkness. They knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, but they refused to let fear or uncertainty hold them back. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where every moment was a battle against the elements, only the strong and the determined would emerge victorious. And so, with the snow swirling around them, and the mystery of the disappearing footprints at their backs, the hunters pressed on, their eyes fixed on the horizon as they braced themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. As the hunters trudged forward through the deepening snow, the weight of their burden growing heavier with each passing step, they couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over them like a suffocating blanket. The storm raged around them, the snow falling thicker and faster with each passing moment, obscuring their vision and swallowing the landscape in a blanket of white. The heavy scent of the elk hung in the air, a constant reminder of the burden they carried on their shoulders. With each gust of wind, the stench seemed to grow stronger, filling their nostrils with its putrid odor and making their stomachs churn with disgust. Anthony wrinkled his nose in disgust as he trudged through the snow, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he struggled to keep pace. "This elk smells like crap," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Tomas nodded in agreement, his own face twisted in a grimace of distaste. "I know," he replied, his tone weary. But we can't afford to stop now. We need to keep moving if we're going to have any hope of finding our way back home. With grim determination, the hunters pressed on, their senses on high alert as they navigated through the blinding snowstorm. The path ahead was treacherous, the terrain unforgiving, but they refused to let fear or fatigue deter them from their goal. As the hunters trudged through the thick snow, battling against the relentless storm and the oppressive weight of their burden, their senses heightened by the urgency of their situation. And amidst the howling wind and the swirling snow, they began to hear faint sounds echoing through the darkness. At first, it was nothing more than a soft rustling, barely audible over the roar of the storm. But as they strained their ears to listen, the hunters could discern the distinct sound of footsteps crunching in the snow, drawing closer with each passing moment. Anthony's grip tightened on his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest as he exchanged a wary glance with Tomas. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Tomas nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "Footsteps," he replied, his tone tense with apprehension. "Someone, or something, is out there." With their senses on high alert, the hunters strained to identify the source of the mysterious footsteps, their minds racing with the possibilities of what lurked in the darkness. Was it another lost soul wandering the wilderness, or something far more sinister? As the footsteps drew closer, the hunters braced themselves for whatever danger lay ahead, their hands tightening on their weapons as they prepared to confront whatever awaited them in the swirling darkness of the storm. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where every sound could be a harbinger of danger, they knew that they had to stay vigilant if they were to survive the night. As the mysterious figure emerged from the shadows, its silhouette cast in the dim glow of the hunters' lanterns, a chill ran down their spines. The details of its form remained obscured by the darkness, leaving only a vague outline that sent shivers of fear coursing through their veins. The stench of the elk hung heavy in the air, intensifying with each passing moment and mingling with the oppressive atmosphere of the storm. But even above the rank odor, the hunters could detect the low, menacing growl emanating from the figure before them. With hearts pounding in their chests, the hunters raised their rifles, their hands steady despite the fear that gnawed at their insides. They knew they had to act quickly, before whatever lurked in the darkness could strike. As the figure opened its mouth, revealing rows of gleaming fangs in the flickering lamplight, the hunters hesitated for only a moment before unleashing a barrage of gunfire. The sound of their weapons echoed through the night, the muzzle flashes illuminating the figure in stark relief as it staggered backward, hit by the force of their assault. But when the smoke cleared and the hunters approached to examine their fallen foe, they were met with nothing but empty, snow-covered ground. The figure had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a lingering sense of unease and the faint echo of its chilling growl. Panic seized the hunters as they searched frantically for any sign of the mysterious intruder, their minds racing with questions and uncertainty. Had they imagined the entire encounter, or had they truly come face to face with something otherworldly in the heart of the wilderness? With no answers to be found and the storm raging on around them, the hunters knew they had no choice but to press on, their minds haunted by the memory of the figure that had vanished into the night. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner, they knew that they could ill afford to dwell on the mysteries of the past when survival depended on their ability to keep moving forward. As the hunters continued to haul the elk forward through the snow-covered wilderness, their minds buzzed with questions and uncertainty, the memory of the mysterious figure lingering in their thoughts like a shadow. "What was that thing?" Anthony muttered, his voice low with unease. "And where did it go?" Tomas shook his head, his brow furrowed in deep contemplation. "I don't know," he replied, his tone tinged with frustration. "But whatever it was, it seemed real enough to me." The hunters exchanged wary glances, their minds racing with the possibilities of what they had encountered in the darkness. Had it truly been a monster lurking in the shadows, Or was it merely a trick of the light playing tricks on their senses? As they trudged forward, the weight of the elk bearing down on their shoulders, the hunters couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The storm raged on around them, the snow falling thicker and faster with each passing moment, obscuring their vision and muffling the sounds of the wilderness. But despite the uncertainty that weighed heavily on their minds, the hunters knew they had no choice but to keep moving forward. With each step, they pushed aside their doubts and fears, focusing instead on the task at hand and the desperate need to find their way back home. For in the heart of the wilderness, where danger lurked around every corner and the line between reality and imagination blurred, they knew that they could ill afford to dwell on the mysteries of the past. Survival depended on their ability to keep moving forward, no matter what obstacles lay in their path. And so, with the weight of the elk and the weight of their unanswered questions bearing down on them, the hunters pressed on, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon as they braced themselves for whatever challenges lay ahead. The hunters trudged onward through the relentless snowfall, the weight of the elk and the burden of uncertainty pressing down on their shoulders with each step. The stench of blood and fear hung heavy in the air, mingling with the oppressive atmosphere of the storm and filling their nostrils with its putrid scent. As they moved forward, the hunters became increasingly aware of a third set of prints in the snow, the sound of footsteps crunching in the icy ground echoing faintly through the darkness. They strained their ears to listen, their hearts pounding in their chests as they searched for any sign of movement. But no matter how hard they looked, they found nothing. The prints seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving the hunters with nothing but their own mounting sense of dread. And then, out of the corner of their eyes, they caught glimpses of something reflective in the distance, fleeting flashes of light that seemed to dance on the edge of their vision. But when they turned their lanterns towards the source, they found nothing but empty darkness, the mysterious apparition disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with questions and uncertainty. Was it their imagination playing tricks on them, or was there something more sinister at play in the heart of the wilderness? With each passing moment, the sense of unease grew stronger, gnawing at the edges of their sanity and threatening to consume them whole. But still, the hunters pressed on, their determination unwavering as they forged ahead into the unknown. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner and reality blurred with illusion, they knew that they had to stay vigilant if they were to have any hope of surviving the night. And so, with the weight of the elk and the weight of their fears bearing down on them, the hunters pushed forward, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon, as they braced themselves for whatever horrors lay ahead. The hunter, trailing behind his companion, couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at him, the weight of the elk pressing heavily on his shoulders as he trudged through the deepening snow. His gaze drifted down to the massive carcass, the dim light of the lantern casting eerie shadows across its lifeless form. But as he looked, something caught his eye. A glimmer of movement, a flicker of movement in the darkness. His heart skipped a beat as he stared down at the elk, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the eyes staring back at him. Those eyes, black as death, seemed to bore into his soul, their gaze empty and void of emotion. And then, in an instant, they blinked, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a shiver down his spine. For a moment, the hunter froze, his mind reeling with disbelief. Had he truly seen what he thought he saw, or was it merely a trick of the light playing tricks on his tired mind? Shaking his head to clear away the lingering doubts, the hunter forced himself to focus on the task at hand. "No," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I'm just seeing things." But deep down, a nagging sense of dread lingered in the pit of his stomach, a feeling that he couldn't shake, no matter how hard he tried. And as he continued to trudge forward through the snow, the weight of his fear pressing down on him like a suffocating blanket, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the darkness of the wilderness than met the eye. The hunter's unease only grew as he continued to stare at the massive elk slung over his companion's shoulders. In the dim light of the lantern, the creature seemed to take on a more sinister presence, its lifeless eyes staring blankly into the darkness. The hunter couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply unsettling about the elk, something that went beyond its sheer size and weight. Its presence seemed to weigh heavily on him, filling him with a sense of dread that he couldn't quite explain. As they trudged through the snow, the hunter couldn't help but feel as though the elk was watching him, its gaze following his every move with a cold, unblinking stare. The sensation sent a chill down his spine, raising the hairs on the back of his neck as he struggled to shake off the feeling of being watched. But no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. And as the storm raged on around them, the hunter couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the elk than met the eye. For in the heart of the wilderness, where danger lurked around every corner, and the line between reality and nightmare blurred, nothing was as it seemed. And as they pressed forward into the unknown, the hunter couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched by eyes that were not their own. The hunters froze in their tracks, their hearts pounding in their chests as the deafening shriek echoed through the forest, reverberating off the trees and sending shivers down their spines. It was a sound unlike anything they had ever heard before, a primal, gut-wrenching cry that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the wilderness itself. For a moment, the hunters stood in stunned silence, their minds reeling with disbelief at the unearthly sound that had torn through the stillness of the night. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn asunder, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shriek ceased, leaving the hunters standing in the darkness, their senses on high alert as they strained to listen for any sign of movement. But the forest remained eerily silent, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the trees and the distant howl of the storm. The hunters exchanged wary glances, their minds racing with questions and uncertainty. "What was that?" Anthony whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Tomas shook his head, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. "I don't know," he replied, his tone tense with apprehension. "But whatever it was, I don't think we're alone out here." The hunters watched in tense silence as the pack of wolves emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing with feral intensity as they surrounded the massive elk carcass. The hunters raised their rifles, ready to defend their prize if the need arose, but to their surprise, the wolves made no move to attack. Instead, the wolves gathered around the elk, their low growls and menacing snarls filling the air as they circled the carcass. For a few tense moments, the hunters held their breath, waiting for the inevitable onslaught that never came. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the wolves turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving the elk untouched and the hunters staring after them in confusion. "What was that all about?" Anthony muttered, his voice filled with uncertainty. Tomas shook his head, his brow furrowed in bewilderment. "I don't know," he replied, his tone grim, "but it seems like they weren't interested in the elk, after all." As they watched the wolves disappear into the darkness, the hunters couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle over them. What had driven the wolves away from their prey, and what did it mean for their own safety in the heart of the wilderness? As the hunters pressed forward through the snow-covered wilderness, the unsettling images that flickered in the darkness continued to haunt them, like ghostly apparitions, dancing on the edge of their vision. At first, they dismissed the strange sights as tricks of the light or figments of their imagination, but as the images persisted, they couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease gnawing at the edges of their sanity. They saw shapes moving in the shadows, fleeting glimpses of things that should not be. Sometimes it was the outline of a figure darting between the trees. Other times, it was the glint of eyes staring back at them from the darkness. Each time they turned their lanterns towards the source of the disturbance, they found nothing but empty, snow-covered ground, the mysterious apparitions vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The hunters exchanged wary glances, their minds racing with questions and uncertainty. Was it their imagination playing tricks on them, or was there something more sinister at play in the heart of the wilderness? With each passing moment, the images grew more vivid, more unsettling, until it felt as though they were being watched by unseen eyes, their every move scrutinized by forces beyond their comprehension. But despite the growing sense of unease that lingered in the air, the hunters pressed on, their determination unwavering as they forged ahead into the unknown. For in the unforgiving wilderness of the frontier, where danger lurked around every corner and reality blurred with illusion, they knew that they could ill afford to let their fear consume them. And so, with wary eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement, and the weight of their unanswered questions pressing down on them like a leaden weight, the hunters pushed forward, their resolve unshaken by the mysteries that surrounded them. As the hunters pressed on through the relentless snowstorm, the bitter cold wind whipped at their faces, biting through their fur-skinned clothes and chilling them to the bone. The snow fell thicker and faster with each passing moment, swirling around them in a blinding white haze that obscured their vision, and made each step forward feel like a battle against the elements. Despite their best efforts to shield themselves from the biting cold, the hunters found themselves shivering uncontrollably, their teeth chattering as they struggled to maintain their footing in the deep snow. The relentless howl of the wind drowned out all other sounds, leaving the hunters feeling isolated and alone in the vast expanse of the wilderness. The world around them seemed to shrink to nothingness, swallowed up by the endless expanse of white that stretched out in every direction. But still, they pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to survive against all odds. With each step forward, they pushed through the biting cold and the blinding snow, their spirits unbroken by the harshness of their surroundings. As the hunters trudged through the snow, their breath visible in the frigid air, they suddenly caught sight of a monstrous figure looming in the darkness ahead. Its form was obscured by the swirling snow, but the glimmer of its rows of teeth sent a chill down their spines. With adrenaline coursing through their veins, the hunters raised their rifles, their hands trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. But before they could take aim, the creature darted forward with lightning speed, its movements erratic and unpredictable. It moved around them in a blur, its screams echoing through the night like a chorus of tortured souls. The hunters spun in circles, trying to keep track of the creature's movements, but it was like trying to catch smoke in their hands. With each passing moment, the creature seemed to grow more frenzied, its movements becoming increasingly erratic and unpredictable. It darted from side to side, its screams growing louder and more piercing with each passing moment. But just as the hunters prepared to take their shot, the creature vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. The hunters exchanged wary glances, their hearts pounding in their chests as they scanned the darkness for any sign of the creature's return. But there was nothing, only the sound of the wind howling through the trees and the distant rumble of thunder on the horizon. The hunters knew that they had narrowly escaped danger once again, but they also knew that they could not let their guard down for a moment. As the adrenaline-fueled encounter with the mysterious creature came to an abrupt halt, Anthony's nerves reached their breaking point. With his heart pounding in his chest and his hands still shaking from the encounter, he let out a guttural scream of frustration that echoed through the silent wilderness. "I can't take this anymore." Anthony's voice rang out, laced with desperation and fear. "What is this place? What are these things that haunt us at every turn? We're out here risking our lives? And for what? To be toyed with by some unseen force?" His words hung in the air, carried away by the howling wind as if swallowed by the vast emptiness of the wilderness. But Anthony refused to let his voice fade into the silence. He was tired of being a pawn in a game he couldn't understand, tired of the constant fear and uncertainty that plagued their every step. "We need answers," he shouted into the darkness, his voice raw with emotion. "We need to find out what's really going on here before it's too late." But the wilderness offered no answers, only the oppressive silence of the night and the distant rumble of thunder on the horizon. And as Anthony stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, he knew that he was shouting into the void, his words lost to the vast expanse of the unknown. But still, he couldn't help but feel a sense of catharsis wash over him, a fleeting moment of release in the face of overwhelming terror. And as he stood there, his heart pounding in his chest and his mind reeling with unanswered questions, he knew that he would not rest until he found the truth, no matter what horrors lay ahead. As Anthony's desperate cry echoed through the snowy wilderness, Tomas remained silent, his expression stoic as he listened to his companion's outburst. When the last echoes of Anthony's voice faded into the night, Tomas stepped forward, his gaze meeting Anthony's with a steely resolve. "We choose our burdens, Anthony," Tomas said, his voice steady and unwavering, "and we will carry this one through, no matter what challenges lie ahead." His words hung in the air, a quiet reassurance in the face of uncertainty. Tomas knew that the journey they had embarked upon was fraught with danger, that the path ahead was shrouded in darkness and unknown perils. But he also knew that they had come too far to turn back now, that they had a duty to the village and to each other to see this through to the end. "We may not have all the answers," Tomas continued, his voice filled with quiet determination. "But we have each other, and that's what matters most. As long as we stick together, we can face whatever comes our way." Anthony met Tomas's gaze, his expression softened by his companion's words. In that moment, he knew that he was not alone, that no matter what horrors awaited them in the night, they would face them together, as brothers in arms. With a nod of understanding, Anthony took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges that lay ahead. "You're right, Tomas," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "We'll carry this burden together, no matter what." And with those words, the two hunters turned their gaze forward, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon as they braced themselves for whatever trials lay ahead. For in the heart of the wilderness, where danger lurked around every corner and the line between reality and nightmare blurred, they knew that they would need each other more than ever. And so, with their resolve strengthened and their spirits renewed, they pressed on into the unknown, their footsteps echoing through the silent wilderness as they continued their journey into the night. As the pungent odor of the elk filled the air once more, Anthony felt a surge of revulsion wash over him. The creature's blinking eyes seemed to mock him, a reminder of the terrors that lurked in the darkness around them. But this time, Anthony refused to let fear consume him. "I know," he muttered quietly to himself, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "But I don't care this time. Not about you." With those words, Anthony turned away from the elk, his gaze fixed firmly on the path ahead. He knew that they had a task to complete, a duty to fulfill to the village and to each other, and no amount of fear or uncertainty would stand in their way. With a renewed sense of determination burning in his chest, Anthony pressed forward, his footsteps steady and resolute in the snow. The smell of the elk faded into the background, replaced by the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. For in that moment, Anthony knew that he had made a choice to confront the darkness head-on, to face whatever horrors awaited them in the night with courage and resolve. And as he walked, his mind focused on the task at hand. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would not falter. As the piercing shrieks of the forest echoed through the night once more, Anthony and Tomas continued to march forward, their resolve unyielding in the face of the relentless onslaught of sound. The screams seemed to reverberate off the trees, filling the air with a cacophony of noise that threatened to overwhelm their senses. But this time, Anthony and Tomas did not flinch. They did not falter in their steps or give in to the fear that gnawed at the edges of their minds. Instead, they pressed on, their footsteps steady and resolute as they marched through the darkness. With each passing moment, the screams grew louder, more intense, as if the very forest itself was crying out in agony. But still, Anthony and Tomas refused to be swayed from their course. They had faced horrors beyond imagining on their journey through the wilderness, and they would not be cowed by the specter of fear. Through sheer force of will, they pushed forward, their minds focused on the task at hand. They knew that they were getting closer to the truth, closer to uncovering the secrets that lay hidden in the heart of the forest. And no amount of screaming would deter them from their purpose. As the pack of wolves emerged from the darkness once more, their eyes gleaming with predatory intent, Anthony and Tomas stood their ground, their rifles hanging loosely by their sides. But instead of raising their weapons in defense, they simply looked away, refusing to engage in the age-old dance of predator and prey. The wolves approached cautiously, their snarls and growls filling the air with a sense of tension. But as they drew closer, they seemed to sense something different about the hunters, something that gave them pause. For a moment, the wolves hesitated, their eyes flickering between the two men as if searching for some sign of weakness. But when they found none, they seemed to come to a silent understanding, their aggression fading away as quickly as it had come. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the wolves turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the sound of their retreating footsteps echoing through the silent wilderness. Anthony and Tomas watched them go, their expressions unreadable as they stood in silence, the weight of their encounter hanging heavy in the air. For in that moment, they knew that they had achieved a small victory, not through force or violence, but through a quiet defiance that spoke volumes. With a shared sense of relief, Anthony and Tomas continued on their journey, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they had faced their fears and emerged stronger for it. And as they pressed forward into the darkness, their footsteps echoing through the snow-covered landscape, they knew that they were one step closer to uncovering the truth that lay hidden in the heart of the forest. As the monstrous figure materialized before them, its grotesque form bathed in the soft glow of their lanterns, Anthony and Tomas stood their ground, their eyes fixed on the abomination before them. The creature loomed over them, towering in the darkness like a nightmare made flesh, its twisted features contorted into a grotesque parody of humanity. Its skin was a sickly shade of gray, mottled with patches of rot and decay that oozed with foul-smelling pus. Its limbs were long and sinewy, ending in gnarled claws that dripped with blood and viscera. Its eyes burned with a malevolent intensity, glowing with an otherworldly light that sent shivers down their spines. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the creature was its mouth, a gaping maw filled with row upon row of razor-sharp teeth that glimmered in the lantern light. Each tooth was jagged and uneven, stained with the blood of its countless victims. And as the creature opened its mouth to reveal its monstrous grin, Anthony and Tomas felt a chill run down their spines. For a moment they stood in silence, their hearts pounding in their chests as they stared into the abyss of the creature's gaze. But then, with a steely resolve, they spoke in unison, their voices ringing out through the darkness like a clarion call. "You are our burden," they said, their words firm and unwavering, "and we will carry it." As the words left their lips, something changed in the creature before them. Its form seemed to waver and flicker, its monstrous features blurring and distorting as if caught in the grip of some unseen force. And then, slowly but surely, the creature began to fade from view, its monstrous visage melting away into nothingness until all that remained was the echo of its malevolent presence lingering in the air. As the encounter with the monstrous creature faded into memory, Anthony and Tomas continued their journey through the snow-covered wilderness. They walked in silence, the weight of their recent experiences heavy on their minds. But as they trudged forward, Anthony noticed something different in the air. The pungent odor of the elk, which had lingered around them like a foul cloud, was no longer present. In its place was a crisp, clean scent that filled their lungs with each breath. Anthony glanced at Tomas, a sense of relief washing over him. "Do you smell that?" he asked, his voice tinged with wonder. Tomas nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Yes," he replied. It seems the elk's scent has finally faded. For a moment, they stood in silence, savoring the newfound freshness of the air around them. It was as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders, leaving behind a sense of renewal and hope. With a renewed sense of purpose, Anthony and Tomas pressed on, their footsteps light and sure in the snow. For in the heart of the wilderness, where danger lurked around every corner and the line between reality and nightmare blurred, they knew that they could ill afford to let their guard down. But as they continued their journey, the absence of the elk's scent served as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope for a brighter tomorrow. And with that thought in mind, Anthony and Tomas marched forward into the unknown, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they were one step closer to uncovering the truth that lay hidden in the heart of the forest. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, bathing the snow-covered landscape in a soft golden glow, Anthony and Tomas felt a sense of relief wash over them. The relentless snowfall that had dogged their every step finally ceased, leaving behind a serene stillness in its wake. They paused for a moment, basking in the warmth of the sun's rays as they broke through the clouds, their faces turned towards the sky in silent gratitude. It was as if nature itself was offering them a moment of respite, a chance to catch their breath and gather their strength before the trials that lay ahead. With renewed energy coursing through their veins, Anthony and Tomas continued their journey, their footsteps light and sure in the freshly fallen snow. The world around them seemed to come alive with the promise of a new day, the air crisp and clear as they made their way through the wilderness. As they walked, they couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism blooming within them. For in the light of the rising sun, anything seemed possible, and they knew that they were one step closer to uncovering the truth that lay hidden in the heart of the forest. With each passing moment, the landscape seemed to transform before their eyes, the shadows retreating before the advancing light as the snow-covered trees glistened in the morning sun. It was a sight to behold, a testament to the resilience of nature and the enduring spirit of those who dared to venture into the unknown. As Anthony and Tomas crested a small rise in the terrain, they caught their first glimpse of the village in the distance. Nestled among the snow-covered trees, its buildings stood as silent sentinels against the backdrop of the wilderness. With a sense of relief flooding through them, Anthony and Tomas quickened their pace, their steps light and eager as they made their way towards the familiar sight of home. As they drew closer, they could see wisps of smoke rising from the chimneys, a sure sign that life still thrived within the humble settlement. The sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, painting the village in hues of gold and amber as it rose higher in the sky. It was a sight to behold, a welcome beacon of warmth and comfort amidst the cold and desolation of the wilderness. As they approached the outskirts of the village, Anthony and Tomas were greeted by the familiar sights and sounds of daily life. Children played in the snow, their laughter echoing through the crisp morning air, while villagers went about their daily tasks with a sense of purpose and determination. With a shared sense of relief, Anthony and Tomas entered the village, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they had finally returned home after their harrowing journey through the wilderness. For in the heart of the village, where the warmth of community and the bonds of friendship were strong, they knew that they would find solace and respite from the trials that lay behind them. And as they made their way through the bustling streets, greeted by familiar faces and warm smiles, Anthony and Tomas felt a sense of gratitude wash over them. For in the end, it was the strength of their bonds with each other and with their fellow villagers that had carried them through the darkest of times, guiding them safely home to the place where they truly belonged. With a sense of accomplishment, Anthony and Tomas made their way to the village cook, the massive elk carcass slung over their shoulders. The cook greeted them with a smile as they approached, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of their impressive bounty. "Looks like you two had quite the successful hunt," the cook remarked, his voice filled with admiration. Anthony and Tomas nodded, their expressions weary but content. "It wasn't easy, but we managed," Anthony replied, his voice tinged with pride. Together, they hoisted the elk onto a nearby table, where the cook set to work preparing it for the villagers' meals. As the tantalizing scent of cooking meat filled the air, Anthony and Tomas exchanged a knowing glance, a silent acknowledgement of their hard-won victory. And as they watched the cook expertly carve the elk into hearty portions, they couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over them. For in that moment, they knew that their efforts had not been in vain, that they had provided for their fellow villagers in their time of need. With a final nod of appreciation to the cook, Anthony and Tomas turned away, their task complete. As they made their way through the bustling village streets, the sounds of laughter and conversation following in their wake, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. For in the end, it was not just about the elk or the hunt, but about the bonds of friendship and the strength of community that had carried them through the trials of the wilderness. And as they looked forward to the days ahead, they knew that no matter what challenges lay in store, they would face them together, as brothers in arms, united in purpose and resolve. And so, with their heads held high and their spirits lifted by their shared victory, Anthony and Tomas continued on their journey, ready to face whatever adventures awaited them in the vast and untamed wilderness beyond.